Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Not a UX Designer. I am your host, Farama Henry, and in this episode, I'll be going solo. And I wanted to talk about something that has been sitting on my mind for quite some time. And I wanted to start by telling you my journey on how I ended up here becoming a product designer in digital strategies and eventually adopting design sprints to do what I do, and optimize it to from what started as a graphic designer to what I am today. So the journey has been a little bit about since 2009 until now. That's when I would say that I really started making consistent income from doing design work. So I started as graphic designer doing sort of like print media. For some reason, where I live, in Pretoria at that time, it was so high demand of having calendar print work. Everyone wanted calendars, corporate calendars, that is, and that is most of the work that I did. So I did a lot of print work, I did a lot of posters, I did a lot of what did they call them, like annual report type of things. So there was a lot of text, it was a lot of print work, but that is really where I started my career and started to understand what design is in the real world and how to apply it. Before then, I had been playing around with online tools, like those were back in the days of Macromedia, and Dreamweaver was like a very new tool. But enough of that. I started as a graphic designer, which eventually turned into a web designer role because I was more interested in the code, how things work on the internet, and I saw that this is where really everything was going. So between 2009 and 2010, I really transitioned from being a graphic designer only to a web designer, and I stepped on a lot of people's toes, and I certainly made a lot of people angry with some of my early work. I thought it was perfect, but it was not business viable. So it was some of that work that you would do, and you cannot really keep it on your portfolio a year later because those businesses don't exist anymore. It's just a fancy looking website, 4-page website or whatever it is. And I'll talk about the difference between websites and products later on, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about my journey. So from being a web designer, I got into the e-learning world where I had to think a little bit more about the user. So being a UX designer sort of like fell upon me because I was now forced to think about who's consuming this information, which was educational in most cases. So I did a lot of work in different sectors of both public and private sectors within South Africa. I did a little bit of work for some of the people in the transport industry. I did a little bit of work in the banking industry and some direct work in the learning industry as well, working with some teenagers and some young-minded people. It was a lot of great experience that I got over the years of these smaller industries. It's like you become a mini expert in almost everything that you have around you and every project that you touch on. So that's one great part about being a UX designer, but I'll talk about the benefits a little bit later on as well. So from being an e-learning product designer, I eventually became, I started diversifying, applying that into my own business. I launched a business, when was it? About 3-4 years ago now, called Black Fruit Pixel. And it was really a way for me to start growing that thinking and that practice. So that is how I I started working with people and trying to apply what I thought was the best way of working and the best way of thinking, using design thinking methodologies, and basically selling it to clients as UX design work. A lot of clients, between 2014 or 15, 2016, even in South Africa, Joburg, especially on a more entry level market, they didn't really understand what the word UX or UI is. They just thought UX UI designers are these people that you pay a little bit extra than your normal graphic designers to do better work for you. So that is how I stumbled being a UX designer. I started working with a lot of startup businesses, and eventually I had more corporate gigs, and I started having a full-time job within the corporate market. That way it allowed me to understand how big business works and how different industries work, and I really started my consulting and my strategy experience design from there. It was quite a journey for me, to go from being a web designer to what I thought was a UX designer to being a product designer, because you really have to understand that it's a end-to-end journey mindset. You are not just looking at the look and feel, which is what people think what UX UI. That's don't do that. Don't call it UX UI. That's wrong. There's a UX role and there's a UI role. It might be the same person doing that, but please don't call them that. Anyway, back. So what is product design? I think in short, product design is, well, I'm speaking it in the digital term anyway. Product design is basically a way of thinking, a way of problem solving using design, that really looks from at the journey, in an end-to-end holistic view, understanding what the business needs are, understanding who the users are, how they're using the product, and really following through from idea to product, looking over everything. So it's almost like an overarching job. It's not just you use UX design thinking principles to apply into a project and you prescribe a method and you leave. It's really being part of a team, partnering with a specific company or a specific team to be able to deliver that product, and understanding the product from end to end, from how it works in the background, who is using it, internally from a staff perspective and externally from a customer perspective. How does everything work? So I mentioned earlier on that the UX role is dead and it's over, and it basically, the concept around UX being dead and the gold rush of UX being over is based around the fact that UX is just a component of what a product designer is. User experience design is a need. It's basically a tick a tick box on the spec sheet. You need to have good user interface and you need to have a proper user experience, or whether you are creating a service that has got humans in it, they still need to give the customer a great experience. So everything is based around user experience and customer experience, but it's really about how do you embody everything in one product. So the UX role is really, a part of what a product designer is in this day and age. And being able to position yourself as a product designer, you need to know, a little bit of everything from user experience design to how to manage products and understanding business requirements, creating business rules, and all of that blah 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 jazz that a client might require you to do. So I also mentioned earlier on that there's a big difference between products and web design. So most of my career, when I started doing any digital work, I was doing websites for people. It's a website where you can go there, see what they do, get their location and the phone number. It's really a face of them on the internet, and that was perfect for those days. But if you're looking at a product, let me just give you an obvious example. You're looking at something like Facebook, something that is a service to people, something that has got users. You actually go there and do something. So that's the difference between a website and a product. So product design is really based around functional digital products that have got a user goal in perspective. So everything is driven from needs. We all know that, and there's something that customer is trying to do. They're trying to achieve a specific goal, and that is basically what you need to design for if you're a product designer. And that's how you're supposed to think about approaching the challenge or the problem that the business is having at that point. And that's the difference between web design and product design or user interface design. User interface design is actually very straight up and simple, and it's usually just answered by creating a design language and creating sort of like a design assets package. I don't know what different teams call that different things, but it's basically about creating a design language, and everything else will follow from that. How would the forms look like? How would the text look like? The positioning of the images, is it round, is it square, is it blue, is it pink? And that's the user interface. And for me, that is just the production work. While we are running design sprints and trying to solve the bigger portion of how the project works as product designers, user interface designers and other graphic designers could actually be working on the design language and trying to understand how everything will look and feel, and leave that up to them and separate sort of like how the teams work and align everything back together in your iteration sprints. And if you want to have a sprint for just the branding and come up with that, you can do different sprints for different objectives of the projects. That's totally fine. So it's not really a static thing. It's not about building a mobile app. It's not about building a website or a desktop based app. It's not about responsive design. It's really about solving the problem that the customer or the person that's using the product has, and solving the business problem that the business also is trying to profit from, and provide this service to the clients or better their experience, really. So it's still heavily oriented on user experience and design thinking. If you throw design sprints in there, you will have a step-by-step process, a really good recipe of creating team alignment, creating an environment that really fosters divergent and convergent thinking, so that you can have out of the box ideas but also be able to be decisive and be able to move forward quickly. So the steps in the design sprint are really designed in a way that you can keep the momentum going and have everybody speaking on the same playing field. So that is how I see what product design, that is how product design looks like in my world. It's about team alignment. It's about managing that conversation and facilitating that, which really talks to something that I'll talk about a little bit later in the podcast, some of those skills that you really need to hone in. But right now, I want to talk about the benefits of being a product designer, especially in South Africa in 2019 to 2020, since the year is almost over right now. But I think it's so important to understand that this is a sought after commodity. I would call it a commodity because I think design sprints are something that can be taught to people, and we can spread the love and really, grow the design sprint community in South Africa. By the way, join Design Sprint SA. Those are Facebook groups. It's a Facebook group and a LinkedIn group. If you haven't joined them already, please consider joining them today if you're listening to this podcast, because I really want to start a bigger conversation around design sprints in South Africa. Anyway, going back to that, this is a really big sought after skill, and I'll use the word commodity really here, because it's a big commodity that's in demand right now, and that means job security in the volatile landscape of unemployment in South Africa and retrenchments that are happening in all the different companies. It's really a tough time, and if you are looking to get a career in UX design, I really suggest that you learn a little bit more of the skills that you need to get to the next stage of you being a product designer. And you can find tons of information around how to be a product designer and how to position yourself as a product designer on the internet. So job security is one thing, and the biggest part for me is that you are part of the change. So for me, it's playing around with voice, it's playing around with AI and robotics and chatbots, and working with different teams and really understanding where the market is going and how people are thinking about everything, and having this perspective, this lens where you can see different technology emerging and how it's actually impacting lives. It's really something special for me, and that is why I love doing design sprints, and I would love to work with a lot of different teams over the next couple of years of my life, maybe over the next 3 to 5 years of my life, and really understand how tech is reshaping the world and how it's affecting people in everyday lives for the good and the better, and how we can turn some of those terrible scenarios where people feel that AI is taking their jobs. How can we turn those scenarios around and really start making technology work with human beings in a way that we can all benefit and move the human species forward? Maybe I got a little bit emotional about that one, but yeah, playing with emerging tech is a big thing for me. I think it's really a great opportunity to be a product designer within this time and space right now. The landscape in South Africa is emerging, it's booming, technology is growing, and you just need to understand what the people are trying to do within their own context and what is the business trying to solve for those individuals, and put those two together. And yeah, it's such a great time to be alive in South Africa right now. So you really become a mini expert in every part of business that you touch, because you really get to understand how it works, who works in it, how they think, and how to go around different scenarios and answer the challenges that the teams have in those businesses. and you can specialize if you want to go in a certain route, like if you want to really look at a specific industry, so that you've got a lot of knowledge around dealing with scenarios in that. So let's say if you want to go into the fintech industry, or if you want to go into something more like the public sector, and understand how the different markets interact with their users, or you can decide to really generalize or adopt different ways of working along the way. So it's really a free model that doesn't require you to understand an industry. So let's say telcos or finance or whatever it is. You don't have to go there with the knowledge of how the financial industry works. You are going there with a process and a recipe and a way of working that allows knowledge to be shared and teams to be aligned, and really help people have the conversations and have the right decisions made, and point them into the right direction to be able to execute the biggest goals that they have. So you don't really have to specialize. If you want to, you can generalize, or you can just adopt different industries as you go, depending on your passions and what you're trying to do. So how do you get started in being a product designer? Well, being a UX designer is already half the battle won, right? So if you are a UX designer already, you are in a great space. That means you are already playing with a lot of design thinking concepts, such as user testing and whatever it is. So I'll just encourage you to do a little bit more of that in your everyday way of working when you're at work. So eat your own dog food, chuck it into how you run your own projects. Start practicing different ways of problem solving as teams. Whether you're working in an agile or waterfall environment, it doesn't really matter, but start adopting sort of like small different workshopy type ways of running meetings and solving problems around your projects that you're working on and within the teams that you are in. So play around with different concepts of design thinking. Definitely get better at facilitating conversations and communicating. Really, that's one of the biggest field I think that a lot of designers in general don't usually have. They are usually highly creative people, spend a lot of time behind the screen doing what they do best, and it's really a big skill that I feel that people lack, which is communication and facilitating the conversations that need to happen to have the decisions made and have a bring clarity and energy into the team and make sure that everybody is aligned. So that is very important, for you to be able, as a product designer, for you to be able to bring clarity and energy and momentum into the team. And that is really what one of the biggest skills I would say that you need to start practicing and finding ways of, how do you facilitate those conversations. And you can sort of like rip out different exercises from the Design Sprint book. So if you haven't read it before, Design Sprint is a book by Jack Knapp. I hope I'm saying his name right, but it's basically a step-by-step process of how the sprint works. The sprint is not my concept, it's a Google Ventures concept. It really was born out of there, and thanks to Jack Knapp, he sort of like gave us a manual for the process and how to do it, in 5 days. These days you can do it in different flavors, of course, within 4 days or 3 days, and blah blah blah. You can read about it on the internet. And the last thing that I want to give to you is that don't mind the design tools. So Sketch, InVision, Figma, Adobe XD, whatever prototyping tool you're using or whatever design tool you're using, over the next 5 years, 10 years, you will be using different tools. And usually you run into a situation where if you're working with different clients, each client requires you to work in a separate tool anyway. So you'll be required to switch tools. You might be required to work with Figma, and in some other cases you might be required to work with Sketch and InVision, or Sketch and Zeppelin. And it just depends on how the team is set up and how you're delivering the design files or the prototype files that you would be iterating on in your different sprints. It's so hard for me to talk about the waterfall environment because I've been so embodied in the agile environment right now, and how to apply sprints, how to apply better UX, using design sprints in agile environments. And that's why you never hear me speaking about the waterfall environment and always putting sprints in context of everything that I talk about. So yeah, I think that's my podcast for today, guys. This is something that I really wanted to get out of my head and share with you out there. If you want to become a product designer in South Africa, right now is the perfect time to do this. Go out for it. So if you enjoyed the podcast, please consider subscribing. I also shared this podcast on YouTube, so you can check it out on YouTube as well if you're that sort of person who likes listening to your podcast on YouTube. I have a community that I'm trying to build called Design Sprint SA. So I have a Facebook page and a LinkedIn page. Well, that's Facebook group and a LinkedIn group. You can check those out. Join the conversation there. Let's talk about design sprints. Let's talk about UX design work. Let's talk about product designers. Let's talk about whatever you want to talk about. Well, maybe not your cats and other emotional stuff, but anything that's design, product design, UX oriented. I don't know what to call it because UX is such a broad term and everyone has got their own definition, not only South Africa but all over the world. So yeah, interact with me. You can find me on the interwebs, and I'll be checking you out in the next podcast. I'm out.